more coming up on FreightWaves Now. Good Monday morning, everybody. Welcome in to FreightWaves Now. We hope you had a great weekend. I'm Kaylee. Next joining me is Anthony Smith to get you started on this FreightWaves Now edition.
That's right, the start of another week, and coming up on this Monday edition, we'll have Max Farrell, and we'll talk about the latest in the world of the American truck driver, and later on, we'll talk to Clarrisa Hawes about one of the most strangest stories we might see all year, even though it's only January. But first, our top story takes us to what just happened with our latest trade relationships. We have a trade report that shows that we have a new number one trade partner. It's not China and it's not Mexico. We have Noi Mahoney joining us today. Noi, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
So it's very interesting to hear that our new top trade partner is the neighbors to the north. We've got Canada coming in the number one top spot, edging out Mexico and edging out China. What did we see really kind of tip the scales in their favor?
Canada was actually our top trade partner for the second consecutive month. So they've been our top trade partner for the months of October and November. But what tipped the scales lately has been imports of oil. So the United States has been importing a bit more oil from Canada, which vaulted them to the number one spot these past few months. Probably the reason for that is the ongoing, Russia-Ukraine war, which has hurt global supplies of oil. And so the U.S. has probably had to try to find some other sources, or not other sources, but existing sources such as Canada. And so we probably imported more oil, which put them in the top spot the past few months.
When you're looking at these numbers, of course, you said oil just really skyrocketed them to the number one trade spot. Was there anything even close in second place as, like looking at motors or any kind of agricultural goods?
Definitely automotive goods, such as automotive parts and assembled passenger vehicles, was also very big between the United States and Canada, and the United States and Mexico as well.
So the interesting thing, obviously, we know that China's kind of fallen down from that number one spot since we've seen more of the nearshoring, reshoring that we talk about, and really since kind of the trend from e-commerce spending and buying has really shifted into those services modes instead. Do you think that we're going to eventually start to see maybe someone even take over that third spot from China, someone else move into the top three, which traditionally Mexico, Canada, and China have really had a hold on the U.S. for quite a while now?
That's a really interesting question. My guess would be probably no, because China is still the second biggest economy in the world, and we still, even though China was in third place for the month of October in terms of trade with the U.S., we still imported the most goods from China compared to Canada and Mexico. And what I mean by that is total imports for the month of November, China was number one with 36.9 billion, and Mexico was number two in terms of goods we imported from another country at 36.8. So I guess what I'm trying to say is China is still very important, in global trade. And I don't really think they're going anywhere. They might still be in third place or second place, but I would always think they're going to probably be in one of those top three spots.
And Noi, of course, as you mentioned, China is still very much a factor. When we look at the conditions really supporting Canada and Mexico being in such high positions, do you see this to be sustainable going forward throughout the remainder of the year for Canada and Mexico to remain, fighting for 1 and 2?
I do, absolutely. I mentioned that Canada was number one for October and November. Before that, Mexico was number one for August and September. So they've sort of been playing musical chairs all year, number one, number two. And I think that'll continue all year. I think, as a trade region, North America we'll have our ups and downs in 2023, but I think there'll be a lot of resilience in all three of our economies. China, I think, is going to struggle somewhat, because of the COVID lockdowns, because of geopolitical issues, because of tariffs that we have against China and other ongoing things. So I think here in North America, we'll have our struggles, but I think there's going to be a lot of resilience in our economies.
And COVID policies. This time last year, there was kind of a lot of tension between the United States and Canada over some really different COVID vaccine policies. And a lot of folks were wondering, is this going to have a big impact on over-the-road transport, specifically along cross-border states? Did we ever see that tension really materialize into anything big in the freight space? Or was that just kind of an overblown worry, I almost want to call it?
I think it was sort of a media sensation, and and there were some justified causes. That people were not afraid, but people had their opinions on the vaccine or getting vaccinated. But I didn't really see any widespread disruption to trade because of the vaccine protests and the issues with cross-border trade between Canada and the U.S. During those heated protests, but I don't think there was any widespread effect on the flow of goods between our two countries.
And Noi, of course, one of the big things that you report on is the borderland area from U.S. and Mexico. When we're looking at that current condition right now, one of the big things that you've been reporting on, of course, is e-commerce. Do we see anything like that potentially even happening in Canada, or is this already kind of, played out through Amazon?
I think Amazon has a pretty good foothold in the United States and Canada, and I would be surprised if there is a huge uptick in companies, e-commerce companies, moving into Canada, trying to displace either Amazon or some of the other established, e-commerce companies up there. Mexico is a bit more fertile ground, and countries, South America like Brazil and other countries are also very fertile ground. So I think looking south of the border is probably going to be a lot more economic investment for e-commerce companies in this coming year.
So you mentioned overall the North American desire to really become this kind of resilient, I would almost call it like an intercontinental trade partner, right? This really strong flow of goods from Canada through US to Mexico, and those three really united. And we see a lot of that strength coming out of the US-Mexico-Canada trade agreement. Could we be looking at this agreement really kind of, obviously that took the place of NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, but now could we be looking at this kind of maybe being the blueprint for US trade agreements going forward in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's an interesting question because a few weeks ago, I wrote a little news item about Costa Rica petitioning to join the United States-Mexico-Canada agreement. And surprisingly, there are a few people in Congress who have talked about opening up the United States-Mexico-Canada agreement to other countries within North America and South America, which I believe would be a really good positive thing for all countries. It would open up more free trade between North and South America, so more countries could participate. Less tariffs on certain goods, which would ultimately benefit consumers like us because it would help keep costs down of goods that we need to buy every day, or goods that are raw materials that are part of goods that we buy every day.
And would a type of extension like that be applicable to countries in the Caribbean and countries that maybe are super small that we don't do a lot of heavy trade with? But if we open it up to one, it would make sense to open it up to all, right?
I would be in favor of it, yes. I'm sure a lot of economists would want to look at the benefit of opening up, or including a country. There has to be a benefit for the member nations to invite other countries, into this trade agreement. But if it makes economic sense, I would be for opening up the trade agreement to any country that could benefit by being a part of this, and it benefits the rest of us as well.
And Noi, when we're looking at current trade agreements and conditions, are there any underlying issues that you see that could cause a little bit of a slowing down or a rift? I mean, when I start thinking about some of the lumber tariffs or conditions that go in from U.S. to Canada, some farmers that really have kind of some protections from U.S. and Canada. Do you see any things like that that kind of still need to be worked out, or do you think that won't be too much of a factor?
Right now, I don't see any tariff factors affecting, North American trade. There are disputes going on between the United States and Mexico over energy and GM corn ban. But so far, the USMCA trade agreement has a dispute panel resolution that's part of the agreement, and that dispute panel resolution seems to be working. We've had a couple of decisions come down from that panel, and all three countries, the US, Mexico, and Canada, seem to really, once the ruling comes in over whatever dispute they have, people seem to be sort of agreeing with it or moving forward after the ruling has come along. So I think the USMCA has helped to work, to lessen any trade agreements or disputes we have going forward.
Noi, last question for you really quickly. Will we see, obviously this number was for November that this came out. Will we see one for December and then an entire full year recap on who is the top trade partner for the U.S. for the year?
That's correct, yeah. Once the data comes out, probably it'll come out, I believe, somewhere at the end of January. I'll do a sort of year-end review of trade between U.S., Mexico, and Canada, as well as China, because they're such a big player. And it'll be interesting to see what those numbers show.
Thank you so much for joining us this morning, and we'll be sure to check in with you with those updated numbers.
Thank you so much.
All right. We're going to go ahead and head on over to the wall. We've got our first carrier update of the morning with Tony Mulvey and Donnie Gilbert.
Welcome into this carrier update on this Monday morning. I'm Tony Mulvey, joined by Donnie Gilbert. Donnie, going to touch on something we really didn't talk a whole lot about last week. Touched on a couple days, but talking about diesel fuel prices. Seemed, again, some positive things happening at the retail location. It's just not a huge drop.
Well, this is why. Do you see the red line here? Mm-hmm. This is our rack price, the wholesale price. So we saw it start to move back up, and then up, down, now a little bit back upwards again already. And this stalled our diesel fuel prices here in blue, where they were still going down, but maybe a half a cent or a penny a day or maybe 2 cents a day. So really kind of stalled that nice drop that we had going on over the past 30 days. Kind of stalled out, kind of picked back up, and kind of stalled back out now. And what we need to watch here is we need to watch what happens with this rack price. I'm not going to bring it up, but currently the spread between the rack and the retail is $1.57. Mm-hmm. Plenty of room for that price to come down, but they're not going to push that price down if they think this rack may jump back up and that close that gap real fast.
Yeah, because, if you look at the drop that it had, right? It was almost $3.50, and it's dropped to $3.13 in just a couple of days, right? That would erase that, if you want to call it, the 30-cent buffer that's kind of baked in right now. Because if you're talking that $1.20 and it's $1.50, well, it erases it. It could erase it almost overnight. So that volatility in the rack price is what's...
It's got station owners concerned. Mm-hmm. So they're just going to kind of say, hey, let's hang out and hold right here.
Yep. And
then when they see this start to fall more, they're like, all right, let's open it back up and let the prices go on down. So keep an eye on the rack price. That's probably tell us a bit more what's going to happen with the retail price. All right, now let's pop in here for fun here, and let's show you, Oklahoma City. Rack price down to $2.83, a lot lower than the national average. Mm-hmm. And the average diesel price is $3.85 a gallon. So below $4, we're starting to see the below $4. Now, this is one of the cheapest markets in the country from diesel fuel. That's why I brought it up. But I want to show you how you can bring up the DTS for different markets, DTS dot and the market code, airport code. So OKC for this one. If I go to the next chart here, you'll see you can bring it up on a map here. And I've highlighted Fresno. $5.70. Fresno is one of the highest prices in the country for diesel fuel, but you can kind of see here the lighter colors here through Texas, Oklahoma, starting to get a little bit bluer here in Louisiana, Mississippi, over into Tennessee. As you move out from this area, obviously, away from the oil production areas, the rates start going up. But you see, all the way up here through Nebraska is some of the cheapest oil in the U.S. And then as you get over here to the far right, you see the Northeast. And then, of course, you see the West Coast there competing for the highest prices for diesel fuel.
Yeah.
These maps are great, and you need to use these to plan the most optimal areas to fuel your trucks, Tony.
Absolutely. Well, Donnie, thank you so much for this update. We'll be sure to check in with you again a little later. Right now, we'll hand it back over to Kaylee Nix.
Thanks, guys. Time for our first check of stories making headlines on FreightWaves.com this morning. J.B. Hunt has announced a $1 million endowment to support cancer research for the University of Texas MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston, Texas. With this donation, the company will be inducted into the Anderson Assembly, a philanthropic society at the hospital. MD Anderson is launching a new initiative, the Joint Center of Geospatial Analysis and Health, which brings together cancer prevention and public health initiatives for research and then deployment of that research. Supply chain finance or reverse factoring strategies for buyers and suppliers might need to change thanks to a new rule changing requiring disclosure of their use. Factoring tools improve cash flow for both parties as it makes cash exchange easier and quicker since the buyer payments up to 6 months, while the supplier can be immediately compensated on sales. The Financial Accounting Standards Board ruled that starting in December, all factoring programs must disclose payment terms, confirm the accounts in invoices in the program, disclose guarantees or assets pledged, and provide a description of where those obligations will appear on the balance sheets. However, the rule stops just short of requiring those amounts to be classified as short-term debt. And as of Friday morning, the total number of ships awaiting berth across the entire United States was down to 25. That is roughly half the number that we saw in late November, and the lowest number seen since the start of the COVID-19 congestion. In mid-2022, Savannah, Georgia had almost 50 ships waiting at berth. And as of Friday, there were only 8. Port Houston is the only other port that has a light concentration of waiting ships, with 6 in the queue right now. Houston had around 25 ships waiting over the summer, and that number was down to 6 as of last week. The Barbers Cut Terminal in Houston was at 41% utilization, the rail yard at 29% utilization during the last week of December, according to Hapag-Lloyd. For those headlines and more, you can log on to FreightWaves.com. And if you're watching us on YouTube, give us a like and subscribe to stay updated. Head on over to tv.freightwaves.com to go ahead and catch up on anything you might have missed from last week. We're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back with our first check of weather. The 2023 Freight Tech 25 list is filled with meaningful innovators from across the industry who are helping shape what the future of supply chain will look like. Check out the full list of these companies and all the latest Freight Tech news at FreightWaves.com.
What does this have to do with freight? Well, I'm glad you asked. People are wondering what's going to happen with inflation. Is there going to be hyperinflation? When is hyperinflation going to be here? When is there going to be inflation? What's going to happen with inflation? Inflation, inflation, inflation.
This is the sexiest topic within the economy right now.
FreightWaves Now. It's time for our first check of weather on this Monday morning. California is still continuing to be absolutely battered by that really powerful storm that remains off of the coast of the Pacific Northwest. And we really thought that this storm was going to pull a little bit more inland over the weekend. It's kind of gotten a worst case scenario because the circulation itself has moved up the coast further into the Pacific Northwest, but that's just pulling more and more moisture on the coast of California, causing more intense rainfall, heavy swells from the ocean, strong winds, and heavy rain again. Let's check it out in Sonar Critical Events. We've got that satellite presentation turned on right now, and as you can see, this is starting off well off in the middle of the Pacific, and this is the California coast right there, where those little boxes start, those colored for all the watches and warnings. So between the start of the atmospheric river in California, you have about 580 miles of just open ocean, ready to pull more and more moisture onshore. So you're watching heavy rainfall all the way from the Eureka area, the northern California border of Oregon and California, all the way down through Monterey Bay into Salinas, and even down into LA and still in San Diego. We're still looking at some pretty heavy rainfall going on right now. So overall with this, the heaviest amount and the highest concentration is going to be in that Monterey Bay Salinas area down just to the north of San Luis Obispo. They've really been hit hard in this little Monterey Bay kind of inlet here. San Jose down to Salinas, down to San Luis Obispo, and then all of those communities there on the coast have been hit really, really hard with coastal flooding to the point where we're seeing erosion. And we're seeing some really big impacts from those heavy swells. Last week, we showed you guys a video of those waves, which are cresting at about 45 feet. Reports of even larger waves have moved in through the Monterey area, talking waves about 50 to 60 feet in height in some places. So it's an incredibly dangerous situation. Areas of Highway 1 have been completely washed out, and overall, just not a good time there. California going to continue to see these struggles here throughout the next few days as well, as that storm continues to pull more moisture inland. Hopefully they will get some relief by the middle to the end of this week, but until then, just looking to continue to be a dangerous situation out there. We'll talk more about weather coming up later on in the show. Right now, we're going to hand things over to Isaiah Buchanan, whose Georgia Bulldogs are losing tonight.
Kaylee's just a little upset that her Oklahoma Sooners didn't have the season that they were supposed to. You know, they got beat by TCU, so she just thinks that all of the teams are going to lose to TCU. So, you see this little logo right here on my chest? That is the logo of the Georgia Bulldogs. And tonight, they have a chance to make history. They can become the first team in college football playoff history to win 2 back-to-back national championships. This is in college football playoff history, not including the BCS and before that. But they're taking on TCU tonight. You can catch that game at 8:30 or 7:30 on ESPN. It's going to be the Dogs and the Frogs, and we're going to be talking. This game is big because Georgia's going for their second straight national championship, while TCU was a big underdog coming into this year. They were projected to go 5-7, be 7th in their conference, and they have made it to the national championship game in Sonny Dykes' first year, which is an incredible feat. Shout out to them. You know, I said once the playoffs got started, it was Georgia, Michigan, TCU, and Ohio State. I said if any team other than Georgia wins the national championship game, that I would want it to be TCU. So hopefully the Dogs pull it out, but if not, I'll be very happy for TCU. It will hurt me a little bit, but you know, that's how it goes sometimes. You can't win them all. So keeping things with football, Christian and I talked about Damar Hamlin, who was injured last week in a game against the Cincinnati Bengals. And Damar Hamlin is very big in his community. He had actually started a toy GoFundMe to raise toys for kids in his community. And since his injury, it's actually skyrocketed. They only had a $2,500 goal, but as you can see there, it's already raised over $8.5 million. And so that's from a lot of people in the NFL that have donated. That would include Tom Brady. That would include Rob Gronkowski, former tight end and Super Bowl winner. So a lot of people are getting in and raising money for those kids in Damar's community, which is really great. Damar is also doing well himself. He's progressing every day. Still considered in critical condition, but he has been able to, he watched the game yesterday with his family in the hospital, but he is doing better each and every day. And speaking of raising money, Avatar has now entered the top 10, Avatar The Way of Water has now entered the top 10 highest grossing movies of all time. It has surpassed 500 million at the domestic box office, and it's made 1.7 billion at the worldwide box office. That number 7 time, which means James Cameron has 3 of the top 7 highest grossing movies ever. The original Avatar is the number 1 in the world. It grossed 2.9 billion, I think, after being re-released. And then Titanic comes in at number 3, which it was number 1 for a very long time until Avatar came out. So James Cameron just knocking it out of the park with the top highest grossing movies of all time. But Kaylee, Anthony, have you guys seen the new Avatar? What'd you think?
To be honest, haven't even seen the old one.
That's right. Didn't really feel like watching any of the
I don't have
Avatar
strong
stuff.
feelings about Avatar.
You know what? I'm a really bad New Mexico State alumni because I have yet to mention a congratulations to my New Mexico State Aggies for winning their bowl game. So huge shout out to Las Cruces.
I'm not even going to talk about those losers from Oklahoma today.
We have a whole new season that
next
we're
year.
looking forward to, and I'm sure they'll do well.
All right, Isaiah, thank you for that. We'll talk to you coming up later on in the show. Right now, we are going to welcome Max Farrell, who heads up Workhound, our neighbors just down the street here in Chattanooga, about some of the trucking trends from 2022. Max, thanks for being here.
Absolutely. Always great to see you all. And I'm sad I get to miss out on the football talk, but I always love getting to talk trucking and trends.
Well, Max, we're excited to have you on to talk about some of those trucking trends. And really, before we are jumping into it, what do you think one of the biggest trends that happened in 2022 were that was going to make its way into the new year?
Yeah, well, right now there's it's the big recap going into the new year. A lot of the finalizing of reflections of what did work, what didn't work in 2022. What are we going to do differently in 2023, especially given the economic situation around us? And one of the initial data points that came to light was the ATRI annual trends report. And what they do is they take input from motor carriers, people working in the industry, as well as from professional drivers to say, what are the top issues that you have? And then they merge them all together. At Workhound, we do an annual trends report. Ours is coming out in the next couple of weeks, and so we're excited to share some of the top findings there. But it'll be really interesting to see, especially with ATRI, seeing the difference in what's most important to drivers versus what's most important to companies.
That is really interesting because it sometimes can feel like the companies can speak for their drivers, right? But at the end of the day, maybe the feedback that the drivers are giving their company isn't quite making it out into what the company makes public. And that's really hard to find that discrepancy. When you guys are looking at those discrepancies right now, is there anything that really sticks out in the data as maybe that top one? A lot of these companies are saying that fuel is a number 1 priority and that rates are number 1 priority, right? Is that kind of the same feeling, the same sentiment for drivers?
Well, it's interesting. It's for companies, it's about how do we make the company healthier, and for drivers, it's how do we make our job better. But again, like there's a disparity there. So, for example, on the top 3 for that ATRI list, for drivers, it's truck parking, fuel prices, and driver compensation. Whereas for carriers, it's driver shortage, driver retention, and fuel prices. And so, what you have to think as a company is, okay, how do we start to better marry the things that drivers are looking for, especially if our top issue is shortage and retention, to better meet the needs of the modern driver. And so that's one of the big questions that I think companies should be asking going into the new year, that, yes, we have our priorities as a company, but if we want to better take care of our people, let's start to listen to these top issues and check a few off the top of the list so that we do show that we are that carrier of choice for drivers.
And Max, as we look forward to these annual results coming up soon, are there any expectations that you have going into it that's going to be somewhat high on the list of priorities that are going to be coming from these final results?
The one of the top critical issues that we've seen in the past couple months is pay. It was the top issue, meaning it was the most frequent theme that said this is somebody at risk of leaving because they're talking about pay. And usually it's because pay is a communication issue. People don't understand their pay. They feel like it's incorrect. And so that's often a trust-breaking mechanism if people feel like they can't trust their company based on pay. So I do think that pay will continue to be up there. Logistics and equipment will certainly be high. With equipment, that's been a challenge for the entire industry over the past year in getting new equipment. And now what companies are having to ask themselves is, do we really want to invest in new equipment given that the rates have shifted over the past few months? Do we want to hold on to our equipment a little bit longer? So it's all of a sudden the strategy that companies had going into 2022 saying we really want equipment. They still haven't gotten it as much as in the way that they wanted. And they're saying, well, do we really need it right now? Can we stretch this out a little bit further? Which goes against what drivers really want, which is they want the best tools to do their job. So again, there's definitely a balance to strike between what carriers are thinking is best for the business versus what drivers are really thinking they want to do their best work.
We talk about drivers and kind of the change and the churn that goes on in employment. We saw kind of a lot of 2020 striking out on their own. Maybe they left a company job to start their own shop, become an owner operator, or even join a smaller firm. And then as rates got tighter and the market got tighter and things got harder this year, they maybe jumped ship back. They went back to being a company driver or joined a larger fleet. Maybe they sold their truck or they stopped running altogether. Do they still have a voice, or like how does that factor in when we're talking survey results? Is it broken down based on if you're a company driver versus an owner op versus a small to medium business, or is there any breakdown like that at all?
So we're able to, in our Workhound Insights, we're able to gather some of those findings. Now, for a lot of the companies that we work with, they do have a blend of company drivers as well as owner operators, and I think that's the fleet mix going forward, where especially given the figuring out what's going to shake out with AB5 in California, companies are wanting to de-risk to make sure that they're able to have a mix of both drivers in their company. And so when drivers are shifting to become an owner operator, they may have been a really great company driver, but they may not be a great small business owner. That's two very different roles, and that's one of those things that I don't think we talk often about. We talk about the rates, but we don't talk about somebody's jumping into this new role and may not have the right amount of coaching. And it's certainly a gray area for a company to coach their independent contractors, but the companies that are able to provide some guidance about how to best run and best operate do wind up having a higher retention rate, and ultimately, they have more productive owner operators. But to your point, Kaylee, certainly there are drivers that are starting to say, okay, maybe I do need to go back to a company that has a little bit more consistency versus the variability that we see on the spot market. I think right now is the feeling out period. I think come the end of Q1, we'll have a much clearer idea of how that's shaking out in the industry. But right now, I think those are open questions across the industry.
So obviously the last 2.5 years were kind of anomalous. I say kind of anomalous. We're really anomalous in the market, right? Yeah. We had very high highs, very high lows, and the pendulum swing on really heavy either side. And it feels like we're kind of settling back into this point, right? We're getting off of those high highs, low lows, and coming back into just kind of more of a stable market. It's like this return to normal. And that's really shocking after those 2.5 years of anomalous conditions. Do you see any trends that stick out to you this year as what we're going to come back to as we return more to this balanced state?
First off, I agree with you. I do think that we're heading towards a right sizing out there. Now, a right sizing after periods of abundance doesn't feel great. And so we're having to wrestle with that fact that all of a sudden we maybe don't have rates that we once had, or that we're not seeing the consistent pay bumps that the drivers were seeing across the industry. So that is a little bit of a psychological mindset shift for a lot of us. Going into the new year, I think it is for companies, they have to be able to tell the story of how do we compare not only to last year, but also how do we compare to other years where there was a right sizing in place. because companies are going to look at year-over-year performance and say, okay, we didn't have a good year, or maybe we're not expecting to have as good of a year, but in actuality, it may just be a good year in a normal market. And so you should plan to compare that to previous normal markets versus the wild cards that were thrown at us over the past 2.5, 3 years.
Thanks so much for joining us this morning. If people want to reach out, how can they do that?
Awesome. Always enjoyed chatting with you all. Come by the office sometime. We are at workhound.com, so you can see the neon sign behind me. Just workhound.com. Would always love to share some of our trends around driver retention, driver turnover, as well as what are some of the best practices that companies can do to build a more resilient workforce and retain more people.
We'll talk to you in about a month when your guys' results come out for 2022. We're going to go ahead and take a quick break, and we'll be right back with more FreightWaves Now.
Like F3, we know what they want is a chance to show off their products, their swag, and make new partnerships that will last until our next FreightWaves event.
But the problem is there are so many industry events, it can be so hard to find the right one to invest your time and energy in. We at FreightWaves take your investment seriously.
Which is why we've brought together thousands of industry professionals in one city over 3 days to showcase all you have to offer.
Because your successful connections at an event like F3 move all of us forward.
Don't believe us?
Join us in June.
Hey everybody, this is Thomas Watson, enterprise trucking carrier expert here at FreightWaves, telling you about my show, Loaded and Rolling. Now, it involves trucking topics for large carriers and even small ones that wish to be large. Anything that impacts trucking, you can get it there. You can catch us every Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern on tv.freightwaves.com. We do it live.
Welcome into FreightWaves Now. In this carrier update, obviously, Donnie, we touched on really diesel prices. Now we're going to shift gears a little and talk what's going on with rates and some interesting stuff happening, both on the contract and the spot side.
Yeah, so I'm leading into my Reefer update, but I wanted to start with our NTI. I'm going to use the NTI-L because I want to compare spot rates minus fuel because our contracted rates are less fuel, and so for both reefer and dry van. So if we look here, right now our spot rates are at 202, not including fuel. If you go to the red line here, this is dry van contracted rates. They're 270 without fuel, and reefer's 255. So right now, one of the reasons we talked about last week why our rejection rates were so low and are going to stay low for quite some time is because our spot rates are 53 cents below reefer and 68 cents below dry van rate per mile. So this could go up 40, 50 cents, and you're not going to see much reaction because it's better for carriers to stick with their contracted rates. And that's a really big issue right now. Second, the prices of diesel fuel so high, they need these fuel surcharges.
Yep.
So they're going to get this 270 plus 68, 70 cents per mile in fuel.
And I mean, it's following almost an identical trend. I mean, so contractor data is 14-day lag. So we're just seeing the impacts of the holiday. But if you drop this red line down, and if the yellow line wasn't here, it would be on top of this blue line, almost identical. And so we've seen spot rates come down here so far in 2023. I mean, we're talking 8 cents. It's not a huge decline, but they are moving lower. I'm going to bet, at least on the van side, we're going to see a very similar trend once the data for 2023 starts rolling.
I'm 100% behind you, and I like this real aggressive increase right here with Reefer right here. Now, this is also going to come back down, but the Reefer market is going to recover sooner than in 2023 than the drive-in market will. Now, a month or so ago, we looked at this data and we saw where normally Reefer contract is above drive-in, but when COVID hit and the demand for drive-in jumped up, these jumped above it. Well, what is normal? I believe normal would be where these are back above these. So come January-ish, February-ish, if this continues, this decline in drive-in might accelerate, and we might see a Reefer back above drive-in by sometime late February, because in mid-February, you're going to see Reefer start taking off again.
Absolutely, something to pay attention to as we move in through the beginning of the first quarter. Well, Donnie, thank you so much for this update. We'll be sure to check in with you again a little later. Right now, we'll hand it back over to Kaylee and Anthony.
All right, y'all, thank you for that update. Right now, we're going to welcome in Mike Baudendistel. He's our head of intermodal solutions, host of the Stockout, and our CPG expert, to talk a little bit about new reports coming from Greenbrier. Mike, thanks for being here, and talk to us a little bit about the report.
So I don't think we've ever talked about rail car manufacturing on this show, but it seems like maybe this is the right time, because Friday, it sort of really gets your attention that shares of the Greenbrier companies was down 18% after they reported earnings. And then their competitor, Trinity Industries, was down about 9% in sympathy. And so you first see that and like, wow, what do they say about demand or customer orders or their economic outlook? And it actually wasn't any of those things that was driving the shares lower. It was all sort of margin pressure. They talked about things like material shortages, having higher costs for outsourced parts, so they're going to manufacture more of those components internally, and they manufacture things like tank rail cars where you have valves and plates and all these safety features and so forth. They talked about lingering supply chain conditions, moving the rail cars and components in and out of Mexico. Most of them are manufactured in Mexico now. And some of the steps they're taking in addition to sort of those things is they're shutting down their Portland rail car manufacturing facility that they call the Gunderson facility, which really seems like an end of an era. That's where most of the intermodal well cars were manufactured. It was their original facility. And then they're also getting out of their marine equipment manufacturing business in Oregon, which I can tell you a lot of the investors always hated that particular division. So it's interesting that these stocks have actually, done all right last year. Like Trinity was flat in 2022, with despite the stock market being down about 19%. And, some of them get more popular with investors as rail service deteriorates. Sort of the theory is that when there's worse rail service and more congestion, you need more rail cars to move the same amount of freight. And so they can actually benefit from, poor rail service. Now they'll come out and say publicly, it benefits everyone's interest. They have a fluid railroad, but from quarter to quarter, sometimes it's not really the case. They can get orders. So a lot of that was related to, I talked about, earlier with the Union Pacific embargoes, where the reason there were a lot of those embargoes was that the shippers were seeing such poor service that they flooded the terminals with more of the privately owned rail cars, so either rail cars that those shippers owned or that they were leasing. And that created more congestion, which caused the railroad to say, no, you can only, move so many cars. And it was one of the biggest, still is really one of the biggest topics is how to deal with that in the industry. So the demand has actually held up, despite the fact there's not a lot of volume growth on the railroad. Sort of last year, rail carload volume was down 0.3%. Then you have the intermodal volume is down about 5% last year. So pretty solid demand despite not having a lot of volume growth. One of the things that stood out to me also was that these companies are, Greenbrier is investing more in its leasing business, which is part of a long-term trend. It's something that the competitor Trinity Industries has really ramped up its leasing, but it's contributing to the industry maybe becoming a little bit less cyclical, where these manufacturers almost don't want to manufacture too much during a boom time, because that could just flood the market with rail cars, and that hurts their leasing business if there's too many cars available for lease. And so the way that some of the industry analysts are describing this, and including some of the companies are describing this, is you're not going to have sort of the wild volatility that you have had historically in rail car manufacturing, where historically, during a recession, they would only manufacture 15 or 20,000 cars. This is for the whole industry. And then in a boom time, they'd manufacture 75,000 or 80,000 cars. And that boom was driven by, we've gone through a couple cycles of those being driven by cars related to the energy industry, sort of just, a couple car types driving the whole thing. Now the demand is more sort of across a number of different, rail car types, which is pretty, I think, healthy for the industry. But so if you're, a shipper sort of trying to digest a lot of this, and a lot of our, recent, customers that have come to FreightWaves have been on the shipper side of things, so sort of what they should need to know is that lease rates, probably going to go up, sort of increasing sort of across the board, because there's not a tremendous amount of manufacturing, volume that's taking place. Like I've seen estimates this year about 45,000 rail cars, which is kind of in line with the historical average. And the number of cars in storage are actually fairly low, with the exception of just a couple car types, like small cube covered hoppers that move frac sand, and then some obsolete tank cars that don't have the latest safety features. And so, if a shipper was looking at their stock prices and thinking, well, there's not going to be as much demand, it's going to be easy to get a rail car, I don't really see that, being true. I mean, like Greenbrier was talking about how their deliveries were still out to calendar 2024.
Equipment side for rail cars, what's the typical life cycle for a rail car? How long does one last before it needs to get replenished, essentially?
Yeah, typically about 40 years. So they're very long-lived assets. I'd say the tank cars, probably a little shorter than that, maybe more like 30 years. I mean, a lot of the rail cars, there's a statutory limit of 40 years, and then you can have some work done on them to extend it to 50 years. And that's sort of on top of the typical work that needs to be done all along the way. So that's part of the reason why, a shipper leasing company doesn't want to invest too heavily in any one car type, is you're stuck with it, for a long time. And if one commodity group goes down, you can just have too many cars.
And so with that, when we're seeing kind of this volatility in the type of commodities being sent by rail, for a while, intermodal was that release valve for barges, because in the Mississippi River, we saw a lot of intermodal activity when we were trying to move goods from West Coast to the center of the country and the East Coast. When we see that, what type of turnover and what type of timeline does it look like to put those into service versus take others out? Is it like quick and immediate, or does it take a while to happen?
So it does usually take a while to happen. I mean, usually the backlogs are out a number of months. And so, I mean, there's some orders they have in the books that are into 2024. Now, there are always customers that if they really need a rail car, these manufacturers will be able to find space for a good enough customer. But I don't know that is necessarily going to be an issue. I mean, last year we saw growth in some of the areas that had been lagging, earlier, like, coal had a good year last year with the high, energy prices, but that was a category where there were really a lot of excess rail cars and a lot of really old rail cars, and they're retiring a lot of those, rail cars. So, these rail cars tend to be pretty specific to the types of commodities that are being moved, for the most part. And so you can have, shortages of some rail car types and excesses of others at the same time. So there are times when you have there are a lot of cars in storage, but there's still a lot of demand for building new cars.
Mike, of course, a wealth of knowledge as always. And if people have been on a sonar call around rail or intermodal, there's a good chance you were there. If they've read any of our content, good chance that you've written some of that. If people want to find more of your content, because this is, I think, the third show that you're appearing on, how can they do that, and what shows can they find you on?
Yeah, so I do the stock out, which is at 2 p.m. Eastern time on Mondays. It'll be later today. And then we just launched PSR, which is People Speaking Rail. I do that with Joanna Marsh. And so we team up on just what's happening in the railroad industry, 26 minutes, everything you need to know on rail, including news, including what I'm seeing in Sonar. And that's one I'm excited about.
Awesome, Mike. Sounds like you're a busy man. Thanks so much for joining us this morning, and we'll be sure to tune into the stock out a little bit later.
Okay, see you, Anthony.
Yeah, Mike. Right now, we're going to head over back to the wall because we have Kaylee next with our next weather update.
Right, Anthony, thank you for that. We're continuing to talk about that strong wave of energy moving on the west coast of California, but this time moving a little bit inland to the Mountain West to talk about what's going to happen as all that moisture hits the upslope and the forcing cools down and brings once again some pretty heavy snowfall to interior Nevada and the mountains of the Pacific Northwest. So let's check it out in Sonar Critical Events. We've got that radar turned on right now. We can see as the moisture moves inland onto California, hits those mountains and goes up in elevation, it cools down pretty rapidly and then stays cold as it moves into interior Nevada, into Idaho and the mountains of Oregon and down into Utah. And because of that, we've got some pretty heavy snowfall across those places, impacting interstates. Some places seeing blizzard conditions today with those high winds and overall having a difficult travel time along some of these interstates. So specifically I-80 moving through eastern Nevada, really from Carlin through to the Utah border. We've got some really heavy snowfall, and because of that, we've got winter weather advisories as well as winter storm warnings in place here. Sometimes we could see some reduced visibility as well as those blizzard conditions, as I mentioned, as those winds really start to pick up. And then same thing moving into I-84 through the southwestern portions of Idaho and up into the northeastern pieces of Oregon. Heavy snowfall crossing those interstates, making travel difficult for some folks. Into the actual interior cities of Salt Lake City, we've got a little bit of snow break going on right now, but more snow will move in across the area tonight into tomorrow morning, again making it hard to travel through that Interstate 80 area as well as north to south along Utah. And then into Colorado, we've got a little bit of snow lingering in those mountains, but they are dry for at least today. Some more of that moisture will impact the area moving through tomorrow into your Wednesday of this week, bringing once again some heavy snowfall to those western Colorado mountains. Eventually, we'll see this snow continue to mix up into the Great Plains, but really not going to see a big-time winter storm materialize out of this right now, and we're actually looking at a pretty quiet week across the eastern half of the country. We'll talk about that coming up in just a few minutes. Right now, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with more FreightWaves Now in just a minute.
Welcome back to another edition of Check Call. Check Call. Check Call. Check Call. Let's go. Nobody works for free, so why should we be expecting our drivers to? Okay, let's just get it together now. What are some of those proactive steps that you can start taking now? For myself, I would like the Earth to still be here for a little bit longer, but you know, is a hot dog a sandwich?
Oh, okay. Is pizza an open-faced sandwich? It's bread.
I have been ready for this question. I've seen the show.
We're all in this together.
Thanks for making me hungry. Now I want a hot dog.
You're welcome. Catch episodes of Check Call Tuesdays at 12:30 on FreightWaves TV. Keep up with all things Check Call on freightwaves.com/checkcall. See you on the internet.
What does this have to do with freight? Well, I'm glad you asked. People are wondering what's going to happen with inflation. Is there going to be hyperinflation? When is hyperinflation going to be here? When is there going to be inflation? What's going to happen with inflation? Inflation, inflation, inflation.
This is the sexiest topic within the economy right now.
everyone. I'm Isaiah Buchanan. And today is a day that history can be made. You see this little logo on my chest right here? That's the logo of the University of Georgia Bulldogs. And I'm getting a lot of grimaces right now. You know, everybody's upset that some of their teams went out a little sooner rather than later. And tonight, the Georgia Bulldogs are going to be taking on the TCU Horned Frogs for the opportunity to win their second straight national championship game. I do want to give a shout out to TCU because they were big underdogs this year. They were projected to go 5-7 and finish 7th in their conference. They are right now 13-1 with a chance to win the Natty. So shout out to them. I know you got to do a little dual screen action. You got to have one TV so you can watch FreightWaves TV and then another TV so you can watch the Natty. But that's going to be coming on tonight at 7:30. Now, keeping things with football, Christian and I talked a lot last week about Damar Hamlin. He was injured and a very severe injury. He's been in the hospital in critical condition for over a week now. Damar Hamlin is very big in his community, and he had started a GoFundMe to raise money to buy toys for kids in his community. And since his injury, that GoFundMe has skyrocketed. It now has over $8.5 million raised. And a lot of former and current NFL players have been donating to that, including Tom Brady and Rob Gronkowski. So it's just a really cool thing to see there that a lot of people are helping Damar Hamlin achieve his goals of helping the kids in his community. And speaking of raising money, Avatar: The Way of Water has now become the 7th highest grossing movie of all time. It's made over $500 billion at the domestic box office and it's $1.7 billion at the worldwide box office. That puts it at 7th all time. So James Cameron has made 3 of the top 7 highest grossing movies ever. He had Titanic first, which was #1 for several years until he came out with Avatar back in 2009, which then took over #1 and is still at that spot today. And now he has Avatar: The Way of Water, which is currently sitting at 7 and will probably continue to climb. So big shout out to James Cameron for having some of the best films ever and potentially having even more as he continues to make these Avatar films. He's got at least 3 more planned through 2028. That's all I have for this edition of the Social Roundabout. Right now, I'm going to toss things back over to Kaylee and Anthony.
All right, Isaiah, thank you for that. I will be watching the Natty tonight and rooting for the Horned Frogs.
I probably won't be watching it, but I'll be really excited to see some of the highlights. And I'm also going to be excited about some of what's going to be happening next couple of days because we have a virtual event.
Yeah, we've got our Sales and Marketing Summit coming up in just a few days. January 12th, it's a Thursday event. It's a little bit of different vibe from our Wednesday events, but that's okay. So make sure you head on over to live.freightwaves.com and get registered. As always, great opportunities for networking and catching up with your fellow logistics friends, and there will be a giveaway. Following that, we've got about a month until Global Supply Chain Week, so get excited about it.
That's right, and the upcoming event for the virtual one is free, and there will be a giveaway, and I hope to see you there.
All right, we're going to go ahead and check out the last 24 hours in freight. We've got our market update on tap.
event like F3, we know what they want is a chance to show off their products, their swag, and make new partnerships that will last until our next FreightWaves event.
But the problem is there are so many industry events, it can be so hard to find the right one to invest your time and energy in. We at FreightWaves take your investment seriously.
Which is why we've brought together thousands of industry professionals in one city over 3 days to showcase all you have to offer.
Because your successful connections at an event like F3 move all of us forward.
Don't believe us?
Join us in June.
Good day coming.
Welcome back to FreightWaves Now. It's time for our 10 a.m. check of top stories this morning. Supply chain finance or reverse factoring strategies for buyers and suppliers might need to change thanks to a new rule requiring disclosure of their use. Factoring tools improve cash flow for both parties as it makes cash exchange easier and quicker, since the buyer can push out payments up to 6 months, while the supplier can be immediately compensated on sales. The Financial Accounting Standards Board ruled that starting last December, all factoring programs must disclose payment terms, confirm the accounts and invoices in the program, disclose guarantees or assets pledged, and provide a description of where those obligations will appear on the balance sheet. However, that rule stops just short of requiring those companies to classify amounts as short-term debt. As of Friday morning, the total number of ships awaiting berth across the United States was down to 25. That is roughly half the number that we saw in late November, the lowest number seen since the start of the COVID-19 congestion. In mid-2022, Savannah, Georgia had almost 50 ships awaiting in there itself. As of Friday, there were 8. Houston is the only other port that has a light concentration of ships. That port had around 25 ships waiting over the summer, and that number was down to 6 as of last week. The Barbers Cut Terminal in Houston was at 41% utilization and the rail yard at 29% utilization during the last week of December, according to Hapag-Lloyd. Cargo service provider Alliance Ground International has reached an agreement with a major union on terms for workers to become bargaining representatives, averting a potential disruption for cargo shipments at Chicago O'Hare International Airport. The airport authority notified about 20 cargo airlines on Friday that the ground handling agent was no longer in jeopardy of losing its license, so business would continue as usual. Swissport, another large cargo agent, has not yet reached an agreement and could be barred from operating within 2 weeks. FedEx Freight, the FedEx LTL unit, said that it has added returns to services offered by the FedEx Freight Direct business, which handles residential and commercial deliveries of big and bulky items ordered online. The return service will be available for pickups that don't require appointments, or they have 2-hour appointment windows. Pickups can be made outside of a location, inside of a garage, or inside a ground level room of a home or business. The return service will cover nearly 100% of the United States population, running under the name Freight Direct. And 4 Class 1 railroads are seeking a stay of a federal order for rail disputes involving smaller financial amounts. CSX, Norfolk Southern, Union Pacific, and the U.S. pieces of Canadian National are arguing that it is too soon to commit to a 5-year arbitration program as prescribed by the STB in December order. They say that the sign-up window could expire before the railroads know the outcomes of petitions asking for reconsideration for the rule. The STB decision applies to rate disputes that reach up to $4 million in relief over 2 years. And for those headlines and more, head on over to FreightWaves.com. Give us a like and subscribe if you're watching us on YouTube, and a follow on social media. And head on over to tv.freightwaves.com for the full experience. We're going to toss things back over to the Walt for our next carrier update.
Welcome into this carrier update, Donnie. It's Monday. Means let's talk about what's going on in the reefer market. Some positive things. I mean, obviously rejections are coming down, but volumes have recovered rather well through the holiday period.
Yeah, so normally, I've always talked about this. Whatever happens between here and the end of the 14-day period, kind of connect that. Well, we've seen this drop with our first day of a zero average in there, and it's continued to pull back up. So maybe it will pull back up, hopefully, into here once we get through this 14-day now, because we have 2 zeros in there, one for Christmas and one for New Year's Day as well. Now we argued, is Monday a holiday in logistics? That was the day after New Year's because everybody recognized it on Monday? No. Some probably took some days off, but in truly, all the mega carriers had somebody there Christmas Day, New Year's Day. They never closed. But obviously freight volumes were down because a lot of the shippers were closed. But we see it build back up. So hopefully here in a few days, and we'll touch base back on it, we'll see it pay back up to where we can get a better read on where volumes are going. But they're headed in the right direction. Now, on the flip side, rejection rates, and we just talked about this, why rejection rates are low. They're still coming back down off the Christmas boom here. And I had talked about, will they pick up in Christmas? They did. They hit, looks like a little bit over 8% here. But a lot of carriers, a lot of drivers, let's say, that would have probably normally stayed out during Christmas, they didn't this year because they didn't think rates were going to pay as well. And more likely they would not have. But the fact that probably a lot of more drivers went home this year for Christmas because they knew they weren't going to get the big, booming, heavy spot rates, helped those ones that did stay out get some better rates. Probably nothing near what they got last year.
Yeah, and I think the concern there, obviously, when these move in opposite directions, right, it means those contracted volumes, right, or what we see is probably a little higher than what it is on that number. But, I mean, ultimately, you're seeing volume. It's primarily under contract rates, right?
Next chart here right quick, but keep talking, Tony.
Yeah, so, I mean, you're seeing shippers aren't really, I mean, you look at rejections, we're talking, 6.8% right now? I mean, remarkably low on the reefer side when you think typically they're up 10% around there. They rarely get below 7% in what you would call normal times. And you see it here in this chart. Shippers aren't feeling any pressure on the capacity front.
And shippers are not, this right here is right at the average, just right above 4 days. Shippers are not under any type of pressure to pay any higher rate in the spot market. They do not need to. They're not going to. There's nothing time sensitive. Capacity is very plentiful, and that's why these rates are going to continue to go down.
Absolutely. Well, Donnie, thank you so much for this update. We'll be sure to check in with you later with those lanes of the day. Right now, we'll hand it back over to Kaylee and Anthony.
All right, guys, thank you for that update. We'll get one more at the end of our show. Right now, we're going to go ahead and welcome in our next live guest. We've got Clarrisa Hawes. A pretty interesting story. It's got a lot of layers to it. Talk to us about what's going on with a wrongful death lawsuit, a daughter joining the fight. What's happening with the story?
Sure. The kind of the lawsuit that Gloria Grimsley's motion to join the lawsuit stems from, her mother being involved in a fatal crash involving a tractor trailer in March of 2022. and after like the Missouri Department of Transportation, along with the Missouri Highway Patrol, investigated the crash, they did find, some unsafe driving where, the driver failed to merge and other unsafe driving that led to Gloria's passing. And where it gets interesting is that Gloria, who is also known as Daisy May, was part of a magic duo with her partner, Spangle the Clown, who he had legally changed his name to that more than 20 years after 9/11. He decided to change his name. And so according to like Greene County, Missouri, which is the Springfield, Fairgrove area, the probate judge recognized Amanda May, who is Grimsley's adopted daughter, as the representative of her estate, not Spangle the Clown. So 2 months later, Spangle decided to file a wrongful death lawsuit, and it was eventually kicked up to federal court based on kind of the amount that he was seeking with going after the maximum insurance policy that this driver and La Trucking had. And so after that happened, Gloria's daughter, who was, named as Class 1, representative of her estate, filed a motion to intervene. And what's interesting is that, Spangle the Clown represents Gloria May or Gloria Grimsley or Daisy May as his wife. They were never formally married. And so the lawsuit states that, pursuant to Texas law that, that recognizes common law marriage, that, like states, like other states are supposed to, if they move, are supposed to honor those agreements in place. But I went through several databases and could never find that either one of them lived in Texas. But, and so that's kind of the ongoing thing right now is, he is, is stating that, in other documents, he's stating that it's not about the money, it's about holding this trucking company accountable. But, in this case, and definitely for the daughter, she didn't go, she was asking that it exceeds $75,000 in the case, which is a lot less than what Spangle is seeking. And so it's like a complex stories. I was going back through documentation, and there were 2 separate funerals or celebration of lives, one held in Missouri and then one held in Kentucky, where her daughter lives. So it's kind of unclear the dynamics, whether the 2 parties got along prior to this happening.
So obviously, like the media hook on this, right? And the hook for people to get this is the clown involvement. That like grabs people's attention on it. And really it's a minor playing part in the story, right? Because it's just a name change. But when we're talking about what could actually be paid out in this situation, are they looking at going after the trucking company, after the insurance payout, or was it something that happened with the driver as well?
Well, I think the driver was an independent contractor for this very small company. And so in actuality, they are going after the trucking company because, the driver doesn't have many assets other than, and his truck was totaled. And so they're seeking to go after, citing vicarious liability, that because they hired him, Lala Trucking hired him, that they are responsible for, his maybe not training him well and causing, in some way causing this fatal crash.
And Clarrisa, as we look at this case and this story, what's the timeline look like for any deadlines that need to be met in the coming weeks here?
early February is when they're wanting more documentation to kind of figure out how to proceed, if there's any avenue like to maybe mediate this, and what struck me about this case is with, the common law aspect. I honestly thought most states did recognize, like, people say, oh, we're 30 years, we've been together 30 years, it's common law. But it appears that they did not have like a cohabitation agreement, which would have made this really not a big deal, because if they have a agreement in place stating that my assets go here or to here, this could have been avoided. But in a lot of not, where they're not married, but, they bought property together or other things, or, have a business together, then, that agreement kind of protects them from what is happening now.
And Clarrisa, of course, just curious here, is there any precedent for anything like this happening that we can kind of look forward to, of saying, hey, this is a similar case or similar situation that we can really base some types of expectations for?
I've asked the attorneys involved in this case, and none of them are at this point speaking out, but I've asked them all, have you seen cases like this? I asked about the cohabitation agreement, if there was something in place, and they're all being really silent on this, and it's also like a kind of a family dispute and everything. And I think, like in talking to the attorney, the attorney for Lala Trucking is also representing the driver in this case, and Spangle's attorneys are not speaking out, have not responded to my questions. But it's definitely an interesting case, and I'll be sure to follow it and update the story as it goes on.
Excellent, Clarrisa. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, and we'll check in with you as the story continues to develop.
Okay, thanks for having me on.
Right now, we're going to head over to the wall because we have Kaylee next with our next weather update.
All right, Anthony, thank you for that update. We're going to be talking about some warmer-ish weather coming to the eastern half of the United States. It's really kind of a nicer week for us. It's been a little bit of a cool down, and we've dealt with some below average temperatures across the eastern and central parts of the U.S. But we're actually looking at our mean temperature anomalies. Temperatures getting above average for this time of year, at least throughout the next week or so. Let's check it out in Sonar Critical Events. These are those temperature anomalies. So this is our deviation from average for this time of year. Red obviously means it's going to be a little bit warmer than average. And so we're looking at warmer temperatures spreading really everywhere from southern Texas up through the Central Plains and even up into the Great Lakes area as we see that colder air depart. And we get kind of this high ridge of high pressure in place here. And as that ridge takes over the country, that means it's going to be both warmer and drier. We're going to see less impacts from winter weather. And that's also what's helping bring a lot of that moisture, that atmospheric river effect into California, is the fact that we have kind of this blocking ridge in place. So with this, these temperature anomalies will kind of stay in place throughout this week and maybe into the start of next week before that ridge starts to break down a little bit and allowing us more of a kind of active weather pattern to return. But also good news with this, when we see these warmer temperature anomalies throughout your mid parts of the winter, that means that we'll see less impact from strong winter storms like what we saw over the Christmas holiday. That deviation from normal looking to be about 3 to 5 degrees for the places down in deeper Texas and about 2 to 5 degrees up into the central parts of the plains. Here across the southeast, looking at sitting right about where we should be for this time of year, maybe a degree or two above normal. But overall, looking at a pretty nicer end to the week and the start of next week for the eastern half of the country. Same cannot be said for California as an atmospheric river continues to pound the area. And we'll talk one more time about that, the impacts from rain, mudslides, high winds before we are done here for the day. We're going to take another quick break and we'll be right back with more FreightWaves Now. The 2023 Freight Tech 25 list is filled with meaningful innovators from across the industry who are helping shape what the future of supply chain will look like. Check out the full list of these companies and all the latest Freight Tech news at FreightWaves.com.
what does this have to do with freight? Well, I'm glad you asked. People are wondering what's going to happen with inflation. Is there going to be hyperinflation? When is hyperinflation going to be here? When is there going to be inflation? What's going to happen with inflation? Inflation, inflation, inflation.
This is the sexiest topic within the economy right now.
Into the hot seat. I'm Bill Priestley. Today we've got another unsuspecting individual set to answer 10 questions they have to answer. And joining us is none other than Matt McClellan, the VP of Sustainability and Innovation at Covenant. How are you, sir?
I'm great. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Are you ready for 10 questions?
Oh my gosh, I think so.
All right. First question is always the same. What is the number one problem your company or organization is trying to solve?
Oh my gosh, affordable, safe freight that is hopefully better than the competitor, right?
That's I think that's the goal of a lot of them there as well. Number two, name something that you think is going to be mainstream in 10 years in the freight industry that is not mainstream now.
But that's the world I live in every day, right? Innovation. The things I look out that are years out, alternative fuel. So hydrogen is not 10 years out, but I think that some solution for bunker fuel on ships is the next solution. It's going to take us a while to get that thing skinned, and I think that's what the 10-year solution is.
All right. Number three, you get to have dinner with anyone in the freight industry, living or dead. Who are you going to dinner with?
Oh man, I'm gonna suck it up if I say Craig Fuller, who doesn't return my text. What about? I don't want dinner. I want to ride in Craig Fuller's seat. I want to fly with him in the plane. That's what I want. I don't want dinner. I want a flight with Craig.
All right, I'll see what I can do about that. We'll try to pull some strings. Number four, what company in freight besides your own are you most impressed with right now?
I gotta say, my friends at Project 44, I got to spend some time with them at FreightWaves a few weeks ago, and listening to the acquisitions they've been making, obviously the just astronomical growth of the company, some of the advancements they've been making and making visibility even better. I gotta say Project 44.
Okay, that's a very fair answer. Number five, you're doing a 1,000-mile road trip, and you only have one podcast you get to listen to for the entire way. Which one you picking?
Joe Rogan. Sorry, Joe Rogan.
Yeah, but why?
Well, for starters, it's a 1,000-mile road trip. The minimum length of a Joe Rogan podcast is 3 hours. So, that's where we're going to start from. And I actually am doing a 1,000-mile road trip on Monday. I'm going with one of our drivers up to New Jersey and back. So I'm going to put that one into play.
All right.
Now, specific episode, I don't know.
That's a great application there. Number six, what is the best book you've ever read that has helped you in the freight industry? And it doesn't necessarily have to be a freight-centric book.
Oh, gosh.
You got plenty on your wall back there, yeah.
I know the one I'm reading right now is Fossil Fuel Short. It's kind of an alternative approach to energy. But I gotta say, Think Again by Adam Grant. Have you read this?
I have not read that, no.
Yeah, this is about focus, something that, here we go. This book is about focus, and it's something that I think we all need to do a better job of, specifically me. I've got 1,000 things on my desk right now, and I just need to focus on one. Right now, I'm focusing on you.
That's great product placement there as well. Number seven, what's the most common mistake you see being made in the freight industry?
Gosh, the one common mistake. I gotta say that this is why the show is called The Hot Seat, right?
Right.
I think we focus on short-term gains instead of sort of longer-term relationships. You know, when you're publicly traded like we are, we're quarter to quarter. Analysts are measuring us almost in stock price on day to day. I think we do a pretty good job of being future-focused, but I think that generally speaking, a lot of the startups and the younger companies that I'm involved with, they're focused on tomorrow as opposed to the finish line.
Okay, that's a good one there. Number 8, I'm going to throw in an oddball question here for you, kind of off the radar. Favorite TV theme show song of all time?
Well, you know, it is sucking up, and I'm going to show my age here a little bit, but I've been watching old episodes of BJ and the Bear, you know, from the 70s. Greg Egevin, Bear. So for the younger people that are watching the show, Bill, BJ and the Bear was popular in the 70s. It only lasted for 3 seasons. It was about a trucker and his chimpanzee companion that would go across the country delivering freight, getting the bad sheriff, and usually scoring the cute girl. And that stupid song from the intro has been stuck in my head for the last 3 days. You know, I could sing it for you if you want me to.
No, that's okay. That's okay. I've got it stuck in my head too. Thanks to you in every way.
Thanks a lot, Matt.
Number 9, here's a tough question. And you're an innovation guy, so I think you'll like this. What's the innovation in the freight industry that you are most looking forward to seeing happen, but won't happen in your lifetime?
Elon Musk Hyperloop.
Wow.
Delivering freight in a container at over 1,000 miles an hour.
All right, that's.
How about a mission to Mars? How about delivering infrastructure to Mars? Since we're talking about Musk, I think that's a little out there.
Wow. Okay. Interesting. And finally, number 10. Complete this sentence.
I'm only 52 years old, so that's a good ways out there.
It is a good ways out there. Yeah. Number 10. Last one. Complete this sentence. Freight is blank.
Freight is, I just had this conversation with a college student. Freight's fun. You know, when they think about trying to pick a college degree and you start talking about things like supply chain, medicine, law, and finance, I think freight is fun. It's been one of the best industries that I've been involved with in my 27 years of working.
Great stuff there. Matt McClellan of Covenant, you are off the hot seat.
Thanks for having me.
Hey everybody, this is Thomas Watson, enterprise trucking carrier expert here at FreightWaves, telling you about my show, Loaded and Rolling. Now, it involves trucking topics for large carriers and even small ones that wish to be large. Anything that impacts trucking, you can get it there. You can catch us every Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern on tv.freightwaves.com. We do it live.
When guests come to an event like F3, we know what they want is a chance to show off their products, their swag, and make new partnerships that will last until our next FreightWaves event.
But the problem is there are so many industry events, it can be so hard to find the right one to invest your time and energy in. We at FreightWaves take your investment seriously.
Which is why we've brought together thousands of industry professionals in one city over 3 days to showcase all you have to offer.
Because your successful connections at an event like F3 move all of us forward.
Don't believe us?
Join us in June.
It's a good day coming.
Welcome back to FreightWaves Now. It's time for our final check of the weather this morning before we get out of here. We're talking once again about the incredible rainfall impacting coastal California and even into the interior California mountains today, bringing once again heavy rain, mudslides, roads are washing out, flooding, basically you name it, they've got it as far as issues go right now. Let's check it out in Sonar Critical Events. This is our forecast precipitation through the next 3 days. We can see still we've got some pretty strong bullseye targets just to the north of San Francisco, right around the Monterey Bay area, as well as just to the south of Salinas. These are areas that have already received well above 5 to 6 inches of rainfall. This is like double their annual rainfall already they've received in just the last few days. And we're looking at another additional 6 to 8 inches in some places, higher amounts in those higher elevations, including snowfall. And then right along the coast, even down into the Santa Barbara, LA area, we're talking about some pretty heavy rainfall moving on in. With that couple, you've got really strong onshore flow. So big time waves, big time coastal flooding and erosion going on today, as well as throughout the rest of this week from this atmospheric river. Places like around the Monterey Bay area have received over 8 inches of rainfall in some spots. So because of that, we do have flash flood warnings in place all along those coastal areas. High wind warnings in place as that onshore flow causes sustained winds between about 35 to 40 miles an hour with gusts into the 50s and 60s. And we've got flood watches down to the LA area as well. The other really big thing to focus on here right now, US 101. That U.S. highway has places where we've got water erosion causing some road closures because of that road washing out. Same thing along Highway 1 in California, the Pacific Coast Highway. Places of it have been completely closed, and it's really just a pretty good idea to go ahead and not be on those roadways at all as the storm continues to impact California. What we're going to be watching is these impacts continue to last at least through the rest of this week. Hopefully we get a little bit of a breakdown as that strong ridge across the eastern half of the United States breaks down coming up later on this week. But we're going to be keeping a watch on that as we continue to see those problems. We'll talk more about this as we continue our week here on FreightWaves Now. Right now we're going to toss it over to Isaiah for our final check of the social roundabout.
Welcome into Social Roundabout, everyone. My name is Isaiah Buchanan, and today history could potentially be made. Tonight, the University of Georgia will be taking on TCU in the national championship game, and Georgia has the potential to become the first team in college football playoff history to win back-to-back national championships. Now, this does not include the Bowl, BCS, and prior to the BCS. This is just the CFP. No team has done it yet. The last team to win 2 back-to-back national championships was the Alabama Crimson Tide during the BCS. But really excited about this game. Georgia comes in as a 12.5-point favorite, but TCU has been a big underdog all year, and they have found a way to fight. That game is going to be coming on at 7:30 on ESPN, so make sure you get a little dual screen action, one screen for the national championship, and then one screen so you can keep watching FreightWaves TV. Now, sticking with football, Damar Hamlin, we talked about him. Christian and I did a lot last week after he was injured during a game against the Cincinnati Bengals, and he has been in the hospital in critical condition ever since. But one thing about Damar Hamlin is that he's a really big person in his community. He loves to give back to the community, and he had started this GoFundMe, and it only had a goal of $2,500. It's a toy drive so that it could raise money to get toys for the kids, and since his injury, it's actually skyrocketed. It's about $8.5 million has been raised so far, and that would include donations from current and former players. I remember seeing something that showed that Tom Brady had donated almost $10,000. Rob Gronkowski had donated nearly $7,000. So I think it's just really cool that you're seeing a lot of these former players give back and help Damar be able to accomplish his goal of giving back to the kids in his community. Now, that's all I have for this edition of the Social Roundabout, but right now I'm going to toss things back over to Kaylee Nix for our roundtable.
All right, Isaiah, thank you for that. And filling in for Bill Priestley today for our roundtable. And with it, we're talking about if container shipping is heading for a possible doomsday scenario. So what two better people to talk about the ocean world than Lauren Began, the maritime professor, and Sal Mercogliano from Campbell University. Guys, thank you both for being here to talk a little bit about this. And it's a really interesting situation, right? I brought it up in headlines today. We are now down to only 25 ships waiting off of the coast of the United States. At one point in time, we had over 100 just in LA Long Beach alone. So it seems like congestion is easing. We're seeing spot rates tumble. And now we've got shippers that are kind of locked into these contracts with ocean carriers wondering, should I kill my contracts and play the spot market instead? Sal, let's start off with you. Give us kind of a broad overview of what container shipping looks like as we're watching this market now really even out.
You summed it really well there, Kaylee. Obviously, of course, we don't have the 109 ships that were sitting off LA Long Beach, much smaller lines sitting off the other ports. But at the same time, too, if you look at ports like Houston, Savannah, New York, New Jersey, they're at record levels. Matter of fact, the Port of Houston is just now implementing a dwell fee to try to make sure that containers are not sitting on their yard too long. So what we're seeing here is this fundamental shift from the West Coast to the East and Gulf Coast. And levels are still at record level. If you look at 2022 levels, they will basically top 2021 levels in terms of containers. The big question here is the whiplash. What happens after we get through the Lunar New Year on January 22nd? Do we start seeing a spring back here in the number of containers? But I think shippers are really fundamentally have changed where they're sending their cargo because of issues on the West Coast. Everything from the labor renegotiation between the ILWU and the PMA, the new emission standards on the West Coast for trucks. A lot of businesses are now taking their business to that East and Gulf Coast.
So, Lauren, pivoting to you a little bit, focusing in on the actual container lines themselves, we've seen kind of a pretty steady hold of the market share as far as what container shipping keeps, but those players have really shifted. MSC was the largest increase in their container capacity, adding over 800,000 TEUs in 2022. And then players like Yangming and Costco ended up cutting their fleet of containers after cutting them in 2021 as well. Do you think that we start to see more of that trend as we get back into this market evenness? Is container shipping lines maybe cutting some of their container fleet, cutting down their offerings in order to save cost? Of course, we know the shipping industry, ocean shipping, it's slow to pivot, right? It's so massive that it's kind of one of those last ones that falls in line.
Yeah, great question. So we've been here before. So we've never been to $20,000 before for freight rates, but we've certainly been to the carriers barely breaking even time before. So that was happening in the 2010s, 2015s, where we saw alliances start. So vessel sharing agreements, these alliances that we've come to know, basically what happened was they were a way for some of these carriers to kind of cost save, to provide better services for the shippers. I mean, we see similar, I always kind of equate it to airline alliances. So ocean alliances kind of do the same thing as air alliances. You can hop on a flight that is doing business as Delta, but isn't necessarily Delta itself, but you're just booking through one person. The same thing kind of happened with the ocean carriers way back when. And now I think we're going to see a lot of the carriers kind of relying on those alliances and on those partnerships to kind of help weather the storm of what they're going to be going through here. I think Dr. Mercogliano got it exactly right, that we're going to be seeing kind of this whiplash moment. I like to call it basically a pendulum swing. So we saw it swing well in the favor of the carriers. We're seeing it swing back over to the shippers. I don't think we're going to stop there. I think we're going to see the pendulum kind of continue to swing back and forth until we settle into the new rates that will be kind of moving forward. I think this thought of, well, we're never going to get back to pre-COVID rates, we're getting close to that. I think I just saw that we were at 2019 rates the other day. So, I mean, that's pre-COVID. I think anything is possible.
So with that power dynamic, the shift, the swing of the pendulum back and forth, when that power eventually rests back in the hands of the shippers, what does that do to the overall market? And how do those container lines then respond? Sal, we'll start with you on that one.
Yeah, well, I think one of the things we've seen is how the container liners have been trying to diversify themselves, getting into different aspects. They've been flush with cash. And as I talk about all the time, sailors with money in their hands are a dangerous thing. And one of the things we're seeing right now is they're investing in multiple different areas, e-commerce, in terminals, in aircraft. So they're really trying to diversify themselves. And this is something that the container lines were prior to 2008, but they had to get rid of it because the market crashed on them. We also have a lot of different factors that are at play right now than we've had in the past. You have the new lane of the Panama Canal that's opening, and a lot of those new ships you see coming on right now are going to be these Neo-Panamax ships, which allow them to swing between the West and East Coast. And these are ships that are being built right now that fit the trade lines a lot better than what exists previously. We haven't been scrapping vessels. I think you're going to see a slew of vessels head toward Bangladesh, Pakistan, and India to be scrapped. And then you have the new fuel standard, which is coming into effect this year, that now ships have to record grades and be able to report their emission standards. And if they get, great grades, that's great. But if they're on the low side, if they're getting, below a C, the GPA of Dooner, for example, this is a big problem. You're going to have to basically start making changes to ensure that your ships are compliant, which means ships are going to slow down. And that means that shipping companies are going to need more capacity out there to meet the same levels. Again, when we keep comparing against 2021 and 2022 levels, they're the extreme. They're the aberrations. We got to start looking back to where we were increasing from 2017 to 2019.
So for both of you, we've had some really good conversations here on FreightWaves Now with our Borderlands reporter, Noi Mahoney, about reshoring and nearshoring initiatives and how we're really starting to see Mexico and Canada emerge as top trade partners for the United States and start to see that not only just in autos and oil, but also for e-commerce and for other manufactured goods. We're seeing a lot less reliance on China, which then turns into less of a reliance on that trans-Pacific ocean trade. Do you think that as we continue to see these nearshoring and reshoring initiatives, that will really alter the landscape of ocean shipping and the power that ocean liners hold, because there will be that transition into cross-border trade within North America as opposed to trans-Pacific? Lauren, we'll start with you.
It's an interesting thought. It's going to take a while. There's 90% of everything moves by ocean transit shipping. So even if we were to nearshore or onshore, it's not going to have the significant impact that I think people might be expecting it to have. Not for a while anyways. We just have too much reliance on the ocean shipping world.
Sal, what do you think about that one?
Yeah, I think, one of the things we're seeing right now is the development of the West Coast ports in Mexico, for example, especially with the new Class 1 railway agreements coming in. We could see a alternative to LA Long Beach and the Neo-Panamax lane down in Panama. We also see the development of facilities down in Panama to offload vessels into smaller vessels for feeder service up into the United States. So I think we're going to see a lot of flexibility happening in the system that we didn't see before. The big question is, what lessons are taken away from the past 2 years and implemented? Right now, the West Coast, LA and Long Beach are desperate to try to get commerce back into their port. This is one of the reasons why we're seeing the freight rate drop so low into those areas. Well, whereas at the same time, you're paying more to go to the East and Gulf Coast, and the reason you're paying more to go there is reliability. You're getting your container on the ground in those terminals, and more importantly, out of those terminals and getting into the hands of the shippers.
So let's wrap this up with a discussion about the FMC and with the role that they're going to play into this going into the new year. Obviously, we know that they kind of had their stuff together at the end of the year, right? We had the Ocean Shipping Reform Act passed. We had them start to look at some rulemakings and really get some stuff done. But moving into 2023, what do you think is going to be top on priority list for the FMC? And now how much sway are they really looking at holding now that there's not such a huge pressure on the ocean shipping industry from the United States? Lauren, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I'm really jazzed about what the FMC is doing. They've really been leaning in here. So the Federal Maritime Commission, so they regulate the ocean industry, the ocean-borne cargo movement, so all of this ocean shipping that we're talking about. Under OSRA, there were some really important things that happened. We went from kind of this wild, wild west where the FMC was regulating the industry, but they didn't have all these kind of precise tools that they now have. So under OSRA, now there's 13 items that are required on all invoices. Otherwise, the invoice itself is defunct, although it can be reissued, the FMC has come out and said, but basically they didn't even have to have the total amount of the invoice on an invoice previously or who they were sending it to. Now there's a little bit more prescription over what exactly needs to be included in some of these invoices. The FMC also has some really great rulemakings that are on deck that are kind of moving forward. We have the unreasonable refusal to deal or negotiate with respect to vessel space negotiations. Basically, the FMC said, look, if you categorically deny exports or whatever it is that and exports is kind of the example that always gets used. The FMC's basically said, we're going to categorically call that unreasonable. And so they're kind of diving in to make sure that you can't just say, nope, we're not doing exports, we're only doing imports because we want these big dollars. The detention demurrage prohibited billing practices is also moving forward. I think D&D, detention demurrage, is the reason why so many people were forced to pay attention to ocean shipping this year. And the third rulemaking that I'm really jazzed about is unfair, unjust, discriminatory methods. This one, FMC Chairman Dan Maffei recently has started to come out and say, look, you can't be doing, you can't be retaliating against people who are filing claims against you, basically sending out some warnings to the ocean carriers, really, saying, we're watching you. And if you're starting to do kind of some shady stuff, we're watching. So even a simple verbal threat to a shipper from an ocean carrier employee, and he's saying from the CEO to the newest sales associate, will not be tolerated. So I'm excited to see the language there. I think they're ready to crack down.
And Sal, last question for you. Obviously, with less public perception and less public pressure on the FMC, that can kind of be the threat, like, okay, well, now they do still, are they going to do less stuff because there's less people watching? Do you think that that's the case, that we'll start to see maybe a slowdown because there's less public pressure, or has the mask been taken off of the ocean shipping industry and people know what it looks like and now they want change?
Well, I think now there's more than just Lauren and I who get jazzed about the FMC. So I think the public attention is out there about it. And I actually think a split Congress, kind of like what we're seeing in the House and Senate right now, is a good thing for the FMC, because this is a bipartisan issue. And I think, those congressmen and senators who are out in the Midwest realize the importance of the FMC. Listen, we have prospered greatly under a deregulated international shipping industry for almost 30 years. However, we're at the other end of that pendulum now, where we realize that we need a little bit of regulation. We've gotten to the point where 10 companies have concentrated 85% of the container capacity in 3 alliances. And, some oversight is not uncalled for. And I think the big thing, to add what Lauren said, is going to be the data visibility, is trying to get that information out there into the common knowledge so people can see this information and we can better track what is happening with our ocean freight.
It's going to be interesting to watch in 2023 for sure. Guys, thank you so much for being here for the Roundtable. Both of you host shows of your own. Lauren, where can people go if they want to catch the Maritime Professor in action?
Sure. On Fridays, I put out a podcast called By Land and By Sea, an attorney breaking down the week in supply chain. Have a listen.
There you go. And Sal, of course, you are an actual professor, so people can find you in Campbell University. Where can they go to grab your show?
Sure. You come on over to YouTube and What's Going On with Shipping.
All righty, guys. Thank you both so much for being here today. That's going to do it for our roundtable. Hopefully, Bill Priestley will be back with us tomorrow. Right now, we're going to toss things back over to the wall. We've got our final carrier update of the morning.
Welcome into the final carrier update of the morning and the lanes of the day. Donnie, get us started here. Memphis, Tennessee to Kansas City, Missouri.
Yeah, so remember, turn your reefer on. If you get turning your reefer on, it's going to cost you a lot of money. And the same with this as well. So 451 miles, head out of Memphis, run up out into the Midwest there just a little bit, turn left there at St. Louis, and $3.84 a mile. So over $3.50, pretty good for running a reefer right now. We were struggling for a while there to find over $3, over $3.50. But going through and digging, you can still find these lanes. And remember, use your market dashboard and test out these lanes. You might have some freight, if you're looking for some spot rates here, you might use your contracted rates to end your trucks in markets with very good spot rates. But we're going to run some lanes here right now that are some very good spot rates. So we have the Memphis out to Kansas City. Next chart here, we'll run some Kansas City up to Kansas City back to Memphis. Just checking here is bumped up to $4.35 a mile. Now, Tony, I found these lanes looking at number one. Maps with our reefer rejection rates, the change in reefer rejection rates, and also our tender lead times. And Memphis, Kansas City, Omaha, Joliet. These are the markets that popped up. We didn't get to those today, but we'll still run through them for our lanes today. If you don't want to go Kansas City to Memphis straight back here, then we can pop it up and go Kansas City to Omaha. Still a pretty good lane. Both markets are really tight. We're pushing up to $4.31 a mile. but it's only 184 miles. So a shorter trip doesn't quite pay as well. Now, we want to run it back towards the Midwest. Let's go Omaha, head on over into Chicago. Still paying a pretty good rate, $4.21.
Yeah.
Been a long time since seen this many lanes together that's paying over $4.
And I think the trend in every single one of the charts we brought up, it's at the highest level it's been in any of the past 6 months. I mean, or the second highest, right? I mean, it's up there. The rates are much higher than they've been really any time in the past 6 months. And I think that's the part to remember is this is the time, well, when you see rates like this is the time to make money because we've seen the overarching trend has been in this downward movement. So try to take advantage of these where we're seeing the higher paying rates.
And some of these are markets that people don't want to go to, maybe like Omaha. But we run into Chicago here. Well, Chicago's been very tight. Maybe not just Chicago, but just south of Chicago, Joliet, where a lot of the warehousing market is. Well, hey, let's go Joliet, next chart here, and run down to Atlanta, down to the southeast. Still paying $4 a mile at 727 miles here. But if you don't want to go to Atlanta, let's complete our loop here. Let's go maybe Joliet to Memphis. Still paying $4.03, but you're only at 513 miles. So these markets are out there. Use your maps, test it with your market dashboards, get in there, and you can find the higher spot rates if you have a higher exposure to the spot market than others.
Absolutely. Donnie, thank you so much for this update. We'll be sure to check in with you again tomorrow. Right now, we'll hand it back over to Kaylee Nix.
All right, all time for a final check of our headlines this morning on FreightWaves.com. FedEx Freight, the FedEx LTL unit, said that it has added returns to services offered by the FedEx Freight Direct business, which handles residential and commercial deliveries of big and bulky items ordered online. The return service will be available for pickups that don't require appointments or have 2-hour appointment windows. Pickups can be made outside of a location, inside of a garage, or inside a ground-level room of a home or business. The return service will cover nearly 100% of the United States population and will run under the name Freight Direct. 4 Class 1 railroads are seeking a stay of a federal order for rate disputes involving smaller financial amounts. CSX, Norfolk Southern, Union Pacific, and the U.S. pieces of Canadian National are arguing that it is too soon to commit to a 5-year arbitration program as prescribed in the STB December order. They say that the sign-up window could expire before the railroads know the outcome of petitions asking for reconsideration of the rule. The STB decision applies to rate disputes up to $4 million in relief over 2 years. And after 2 months of delaying the program, Port Houston will be implementing dwell fees at its 2 container terminals starting on February 1st. The fees are aimed at shipping companies that stay too long at the crowded container yards in order to keep goods moving efficiently. The port had initially planned to begin enforcing dwell fees in December 1st, but they had to complete necessary software upgrades in order to move forward. The fees will be $45 per container per day, and that fee will be assessed on top of demurrage charges for loaded import containers. Those containers will be held until cargo owners reconcile all fines and fees. And you can find those headlines and more on FreightWaves.com as well as our FreightWaves app. Head on over to tv.freightwaves.com for the full FreightWaves TV experience and to catch any of our content that you've missed. And Anthony, if people want to get involved with our Sales and Marketing Summit, which is happening Thursday of this week, where can they go to do that?
Of course, you can go to live.freightwaves.com because that's where you get registered and it's absolutely free and there's going to be a giveaway.
Absolutely. So head on over there, get registered, and while you're there, you might as well register for our other virtual events happening this year as well. Just about a month, we will be ready to go with our Global Supply Chain Week. That's always a great time and you don't want to miss it.
That's right. It's going to be like really one of those biggest virtual events that you don't want to miss because there's just so much content that week. As it is every single year, we're not done here with FreightWaves content today. We have much more coming up. We're going to have What the Truck on in just about an hour. And of course, you heard from Mike Baudendistel. He'll be on later on today as well.
We've got the Drop Zone this afternoon with Jack Dalio as well. And Anthony, if people are excited about our virtual events, should they be getting excited about our in-person events as well?
Oh, most definitely. We have our next in-person event that's going to be in Ohio, Cleveland, Ohio, not Tennessee.
Not Tennessee, Cleveland, Ohio. Future of Supply Chain will be here in just about a 6 short months. So start making your plans. Maybe get your tickets now while you still have that early bird special. That's it for us here today on your Monday. We will be back tomorrow starting live at 9 a.m. And you know, Anthony, you're used to saying 24-hour countdown to Freightonomics on Wednesdays, but that moves to today, doesn't it?
That moves to Tuesdays now. We're now Tuesdays at 2 with me and Zach Strickland, and we're going to start the year off right with an amazing Freightonomics episode tomorrow.
So that's tomorrow. We'll see you guys tomorrow morning at 9. Have a great rest of your Monday.
#1 source for transportation and logistics news. FreightWaves.com provides you with in-depth news coverage, data, and insights from the leading industry journalists and market experts. On FreightWaves.com, you can also watch the only streaming TV network dedicated to freight. FreightWaves